I still remember the exact moment the air around me seemed to freeze. It wasn't because of the weather. It was because of the words, sharp, dismissive, shocking, that my daughter-in-law dropped so casually at my feet, as if they meant nothing. I was standing on the airport curb, clutching the little navy suitcase I'd owned for years. The one I only dusted off for family trips. This vacation was supposed to be special, a rare gift to myself after a lifetime of putting everyone else first. My son had insisted on it, had even hugged me 2 nights earlier and said, "Mom, you deserve this. We want you with us." Those words had warmed me, made me believe for the first time in a long time that I wasn't just an afterthought in their world. But all of those feelings shattered when my daughter-in-law, barely looking up from her phone, sighed and said, "Oh, we gave your ticket to my mom. The grandkids love her more anyway." For a second, I actually laughed. A small, shaky laugh that sounded more like a question than amusement. I waited for someone, my son, my grandkids, even her mom, to jump in and tell me she was joking. But no one moved. No one softened. They all stood there with their luggage perfectly aligned, their matching outfits crisp and bright, like they were taking a picture for a magazine. Without me. My son shifted uncomfortably, but he didn't speak. My grandchildren stared at the ground, kicking their little shoes against the concrete, and her mother, dressed like she was going to a beach photo shoot, smiled as if this was the most natural thing in the world. In that moment, I felt something inside me loosen, like a thread pulling from a sweater. I felt ridiculous, standing there with my small suitcase and hopeful smile. I felt exposed, like the whole world could see how easily my place in my own family could be handed to someone else. I opened my mouth to ask for an explanation, but before I could get a word out, her mother stepped closer and touched my arm lightly. She leaned in, her perfume heavy and floral, and whispered, "You should have seen this coming." My heart sank so fast it almost made me dizzy. That wasn't a joke. That wasn't a misunderstanding. That was a warning, a taunt. Something rehearsed. Something she had been waiting to say. And what terrified me most was that she said it with the kind of certainty that made me wonder how long this decision had been in the making. How far behind my back had they planned this? I felt my voice wobble as I tried to speak. I wanted to say something calm, something that would restore my dignity, but the words tangled up in my throat. I asked my son softly, "Why would you do this? What's going on?" He wouldn't meet my eyes. He just stared somewhere past my shoulder, jaw tight, the way he did when he wanted to avoid a confrontation at any cost. That hurt more than if he had yelled at me. Then came the moment that stayed with me long after that day, long after everything else fell apart. My granddaughter, sweet little Anna, tugged at her mother's sleeve, looked up at me with those big brown eyes that had once lit up the moment I entered a room, and said, "Daddy said you wouldn't mind. He said you don't need to come anymore." My knees nearly buckled. I didn't mind. I didn't need to come. What else had he told them? Before I could react, before I could gently pull her close and ask what she meant, her mother snapped her fingers sharply like Anna was a pet, not a child, and told her to get into the van. My granddaughter hesitated, staring at me with that look kids have when they know something feels wrong but don't know how to fix it. That hesitation alone almost made me break down right there on the curb. I forced myself to breathe, to stay upright, to speak. "Anna, sweetheart, what did Daddy tell you?" And she opened her mouth to answer, but her mother swooped down, grabbed her by the shoulders, and said through clenched teeth, "Don't start that again. We're not reopening this conversation." Again. Reopening. My mind raced. What conversations had they already had about me? How many times had they practiced justifying this betrayal? And just when I thought I had absorbed all the pain a single moment could possibly deliver, my daughter-in-law turned to me with a look I can only describe as triumphant. Triumphant. Like she had won something. She tucked her phone into her designer purse, stepped forward, and said, in a voice so sweet it almost felt mocking, "Look, it just makes more sense this way. My mom is closer to the kids. She understands them better. You get tired. You forget things. We didn't want to make the trip hard for you." Her mother nodded along like a proud accomplice. "It's for your own good," she said brightly. That sentence, "for your own good," stabbed deeper than anything else. It was the kind of line manipulators used when they wanted to hurt you but still feel righteous while doing it. My face burned with humiliation. I could feel people around us glancing over, recognizing what was happening. Even strangers could see I was being discarded, yet my own family pretended they were doing me a favor. I tried one last time. "I thought we were traveling together," I said quietly. My voice sounded so small I barely recognized it. My son finally looked at me then, but it wasn't with love or regret. It was with something darker, guilt twisted into irritation. "Mom, it was a last-minute change. Don't make this a thing. We'll do something later. Maybe a weekend visit. A weekend visit. I was their mother, and I was being spoken to like an optional guest. My hands trembled as I gripped my suitcase handle. I felt shame climb up my throat, thick and suffocating. I knew any further protest would make me look desperate. And that was something I refused to be, not even for the family I once lived for. I whispered, "Okay. Have a safe trip." I tried to smile, but my lips wouldn't move properly. They didn't hug me. They didn't thank me. They didn't even look back as they walked toward the automatic doors. But then something happened that changed everything. Just as my daughter-in-law reached the entrance, she paused, turned back, and looked me up and down with a slow, evaluating stare, like she was checking to see if I was breaking the way she hoped I would. And then, without warning, she walked back to me, heels clicking aggressively against the pavement, and leaned in so close I could feel her breath on my ear. What she whispered next made my entire body go cold, but worse, much worse, was what she did after that. Because that moment, the moment she decided to cross a line I never thought any daughter-in-law could cross, became the first thread in the unraveling of a truth that nearly destroyed every piece of the life I had built for them. And what she did next nearly destroyed the life I had built for all of them. I wish I could tell you that the week after the will reading was peaceful, that the tension dissolved, that the family found its way back to something resembling warmth, but that would be a lie. The truth was colder, sharper, almost clinical. It began the very next morning, when I walked down the hallway and saw Daniel standing in my father's office. The one room he swore none of us should enter for at least 40 days out of respect. My father had rules, strange, old-fashioned rules, but Daniel used to mock them, calling them relic behaviors from a generation terrified of its own emotions. Yet here he was, inside the room, moving things, touching things, cataloging things as if he owned them. I leaned against the doorway, watching silently. The light from the window cut across his face, dividing it half guilt, half something else, something I still didn't know how to read. He didn't flinch when he saw me, didn't apologize, didn't even pretend to be embarrassed. He simply lifted a document, shook it once to straighten the pages, and said, in that calm, emotionless tone of his, "You should really learn to knock." There was no anger, just control, quiet, measured control. "I didn't know anyone was in here," I replied, though we both knew it was a lie. I had heard him talking inside, low, hushed, rhythmic, like someone rehearsing a speech. "What are you doing?" I asked. He looked at me the way someone looks at a child asking about taxes, used, but disappointed at the same time. "Protecting the family," he said. And that sentence would echo in my mind for months, because every villain in my family always claimed they were protecting us. They destroyed things, manipulated things, and twisted truths, but they always said it was for our own good. I stepped further inside. The room still smelled like my father left: dust, old paper, and that faint smell of pine he insisted on using during winter. "You don't protect the family by going through his documents," I said. Daniel smiled, calm/gentle, almost sympathetic. "You think I want to do this?" he asked. "You think I enjoy being the only responsible one?" He sighed, placing the paper down. "He promised me something, you know?" My jaw tightened. There it was again. That phrase, the one that always preceded manipulation. He promised me. My father made many promises, yes, some emotional, some logistical, some spiritual, but Daniel used that line like a card he could play whenever he wanted leverage. "What did he promise you?" I asked carefully. But Daniel didn't answer, not directly. He just tilted his head and said, "Not everything written is everything intended." It was a threat disguised as philosophy, a soft warning, a gentle push, a subtle reminder that he believed he understood my father more than the rest of us ever could. I didn't know then, not yet. But this was the moment things began to unravel. He stepped past me, leaving the office door slightly open, just slightly, a tiny detail, but Daniel never left anything slightly open. He was obsessive about closure, which meant he wanted me to go inside. He wanted me to see something, and for a moment, I almost did, almost walked in, almost let curiosity swallow common sense. But then I remembered my father's voice, soft, firm, unshakable. Not every truth is meant to be found in a room. Some truths reveal themselves in people. So I stepped back and followed Daniel instead. He was already in the kitchen by the time I caught up, pouring tea, moving with that eerie calmness that only people who enjoy emotional imbalance can maintain. He handed me a cup without looking, as if I were expected to take it, as if refusing wasn't an option. You're awfully quiet, he said. I'm thinking. I replied. That's dangerous, he murmured. Thinking leads to suspicion, and suspicion leads to complications. There was no smile, no humor, just a statement. A warning disguised as concern. I placed the cup down untouched. What complications? I asked. He finally met my eyes. You don't want to start a war you can't win. A war. Over the will. Over property. Over what? I didn't know then. But that sentence was another seed he was planting. Another psychological leash he hoped I would clasp around my own neck. He leaned closer. You're overwhelmed, he whispered. You need rest. You need stability. You need someone who understands the weight of family responsibility. I lifted my chin. What I need is transparency. He chuckled just once. Soft, controlled. Transparency is overrated, he said, and then he left. Just like that. But the problem wasn't the conversation. The problem was what I found 2 hours later. The house was loud with relatives arguing in the dining room. The kind of arguments born from grief and old scars where every sentence begins with you always, or you never. I slipped away, needing silence. Needing air. That's when I saw something out of place on the staircase. The leather notebook my father never allowed out of his study. The one he used for personal reflections, private sketches, and his strange habit of writing letters to himself. It was sitting there, perfectly centered on the third step. Daniel's subtlety again. He wanted me to find it. I picked it up. The leather was still warm. Someone had just been holding it. My heart raced. Not because I wanted to invade my father's privacy, but because the moment I held the notebook, something felt wrong. Off. Not like him. As if the object itself had absorbed the tension of the last 24 hours. I opened the first page. Blank. Second page. Blank. Third page. Blank. All the pages were blank. Every single one. My father's notebook, his sacred notebook, empty. But I knew it hadn't been empty last week. I helped him reorganize the shelves. I placed this very notebook back into its place. It was filled front to back with his handwriting. So who had erased it? Why? I stood there, gripping the spine, feeling a coldness spread through me. He promised me. Daniel's words echoed again. Promised him what? To cover something up. To leave him something specific. To destroy something. Or maybe, to erase something. My breathing grew uneven. I didn't know then. But this was my father's first secret. Not the kind he kept from us, but the kind someone else took from him. Before I could process it, Maria, my father's sister, called my name from the hallway. You need to come, she said breathlessly. It's your aunt. She's upset. But upset wasn't the right word. The woman was trembling, angry, hurt, confused. All at once, she said Daniel told her something, Maria whispered, and that sentence, that single sentence pulled me straight into another storm. What did he say? I asked. Maria's eyes darted around nervously. He told her that the change in the will wasn't accidental. My heart froze. He said your father meant to leave Daniel in control. She continued, but something happened before he could finalize it. Something unfinished. No, that wasn't true. It couldn't be. He's manipulating, I said firmly. Maria nodded weakly. But he's convincing. Of course he was. That was his gift. Daniel never shouted. He never threatened loudly. He used quiet words, quiet doubts, quiet rewrites of truth. The kind that burrow under the skin. He promised me. His words again. Always that line. I took a deep breath and steadied myself. Where is he now? In the backyard, Maria whispered. Talking to her. His fiancée, the woman who appeared the day after the funeral, acting as if she had been a part of the family for years. Elegant, soft-spoken, polite, but with eyes that searched the room like she was mapping the weaknesses of every person inside it. I walked outside slowly. Their backs were turned. Daniel's posture relaxed, hers poised and perfect. She was whispering something to him. Too low to hear, but when she caught a glimpse of me in the reflection of the glass door, she stopped mid-sentence. Then she smiled, sweet, warm, deceptively gentle. Join us, she said. The invitation wasn't genuine. It was strategic. I'll stand, I replied. Daniel crossed his arms. You look troubled. You're spreading lies, I said quietly. To my aunt, to others. He blinked once. Slowly, everyone handles grief differently, he murmured. Some cling to truth, others cling to fantasies. She placed a hand on Daniel's forearm. Maybe she just needs reassurance, she said soothingly. But her eyes told another story. Eyes that analyzed, measured, assessed, in silence. Daniel turned back to me. I'm only telling people what your father told me. Another twist. Another card. Another false narrative delivered with surgical calm. What exactly did he tell you? I asked, forcing my voice to stay steady. He paused, studying me. Then he said, with complete confidence, that he didn't trust you to handle the estate. Something in me broke, something quiet and internal. Because I knew that wasn't true. I knew the private conversations my father and I had. I knew the nights he sat with me and said, it was never about money, it was about control. Families lose themselves chasing the wrong things. He trusted me with those words. He trusted me with his fears. Daniel saw the shift in my expression and, like all manipulators, he pressed deeper. He said you were emotional, Daniel continued, too emotional to make long-term decisions. Maybe that was true. Maybe I was emotional, but being emotional didn't mean being incompetent. And being calm didn't mean being honest. I took a step back. Because suddenly the air felt wrong, thick, heavy, poisonous. His fiancée spoke this time. You should rest, she said softly. You're not thinking clearly. You're overwhelmed. And people make mistakes when they're overwhelmed. The wording, the tone, the implication. They were building a narrative piece by piece. A narrative where I was the unstable one, where they were the responsible ones, where control naturally fell into their hands. I'm not overwhelmed, I said. But even as I said it, I felt the weight of everything piling up. My father's erased notebook, Daniel's cryptic warnings, whispered conversations spreading like smoke, too many coincidences, too many half-truths. I didn't know then, but this was their first move, their opening act. And I had stepped right into the center of it. If you were in my place, if someone calmly rewrote your dead father's intentions, would you confront them publicly, or wait and gather evidence first? Comment below because this moment defined everything that came next. I turned away, forcing myself not to react emotionally. That would only fuel their narrative. But as I stepped back, toward the house, something made me stop. A voice, not Daniel's, not his fiancée, my cousin, Ava, de-stressed speaking to someone on the phone behind the tool shed. I'm telling you, she whispered. The document wasn't like this last week. Someone changed it. Changed what? I crept closer. No, she continued, I don't think the lawyer knows. And if he does, he's not saying anything. My heart hammered. Changed what? The will? A letter? A clause? What had been altered? Before I could step closer, Ava hung up, and when she turned, she froze. You heard me, she said quietly. I swallowed. What was changed? She hesitated, glancing toward the house. I wasn't supposed to see it, she whispered, but I was helping the lawyer organize the documents after the ceremony, and something about the dates didn't match. Dates. One word, but it detonated something in my chest. What dates? I pressed. The signature dates, she whispered, your father's, and the witness signatures. They didn't line up, not even close. I felt sick. He promised me. Daniel's words earlier. Promised him what? A different structure, a different version. Ava stepped closer, lowering her voice further. And there's more. Something else. My breath caught. What else? Her eyes filled with fear. I think someone forged one of the pages. The world tilted. Forged. That word changed everything. Ava, I whispered. Who do you think did it? She didn't answer immediately. She just looked back toward the house, toward Daniel. And her silence was louder than any accusation. Before I could process it, she grabbed my hand. You can't trust anyone, she said, not even the ones acting calm. And that was when I knew something was deeply, dangerously wrong. But nothing prepared me for what happened that night, when I finally decided to open my father's safe. Hours later, when most relatives had left and the house had settled into an uneasy, grief-soaked quiet, I went into my father's study. The safe was hidden behind a shelf, subtle, discreet, designed to blend. He had told me the combination months before his health declined. A precaution, he said. Not a gift. Not a legacy. A precaution? A precaution against what? I reached behind the books, pressed the latch, and exposed the keypad. My hands trembled as I typed the numbers. The lock clicked open. Inside were 3 items, a sealed envelope with my name, a USB drive, and a small, cloth-wrapped object. The moment I reached for the envelope, something clicked behind me. A floorboard. Someone was outside the door, listening. I held my breath. Then a shadow shifted under the doorway. Not moving, just waiting. I didn't know then, but that moment would change the entire direction of the story. I gently closed the safe. covering the keypad with a book, and then I said loudly, "I'll check later, I'm tired." Silence, then, the shadow moved away. I waited 5 full minutes before breathing again. Only then did I slip the envelope into my pocket and leave the room. My father had written my name on it in his neat handwriting, but on the back, one sentence was written differently, not in his usual ink, not with his usual pressure. 3 words. Don't trust him. Him, not them, not anyone. Him. One person. One specific man. I knew who he meant, Daniel, because my father. He may have been old-fashioned. He may have been secretive, but he was not vague. He was intentional, precise, direct. And this message, this whispered warning from beyond his final breath, it wasn't paranoia. It wasn't confusion. It wasn't fear. It was protection. The kind of protection only a parent gives when time is running out. I felt tears sting my eyes. He promised me. I whispered bitterly. Who did you make promises to, Father? I didn't know then, but everything was about to escalate because the moment I stepped into the hallway, I saw him, Daniel, leaning casually against the wall, arms crossed, expression unreadable. "How long have you been standing there?" I asked. He smiled. "Long enough." What do you think Daniel heard behind that door? And what would you have done in my place? Confront him directly, or pretend nothing happened? Let me know in the comments. Your take helps shape the next parts. He approached me slowly, too slowly. "Did you find what you were looking for?" he asked. "I wasn't looking for anything." He tilted his head. "Lying doesn't suit you." Then he stepped closer. Too close. "You're digging in places you shouldn't," he whispered. "You're opening doors that were meant to stay closed." The irony hit me hard. Daniel, the man rewriting truths, warning me about boundaries. I forced a calm tone. "And you're crossing lines that aren't yours." For the first time all day, something flickered in his eyes. Not anger, not fear. Annoyance. The first crack in his perfect composure. His voice dropped lower. "Be careful." "Of what?" I asked. He leaned in, speaking so close to my ear that every word crawled across my skin. "Of believing everything your father said." I froze. What did he mean? What was he implying? That my father had lied, or that someone else had rewritten his words? Before I could ask, he stepped back, masking the threat under a gentle smile. "Good night," he said softly, then he walked away. Calm, silent, certain. And for the first time since my father's death, I felt real fear settle into my bones. Not because Daniel was dangerous, though he was. Not because he was cunning, though he was. But because I finally realized he was ahead of me. He had been ahead of me since the beginning. And everything that had happened, every whisper, every rumor, every well-timed conversation was part of a larger plan. I didn't know then. But this was only the beginning of his attempts to seize control. Because the next morning, the envelope my father left for me, the one that said "Don't trust him," was gone from my pocket, vanished, stolen. And Daniel was standing in the kitchen, pouring his tea, humming softly, as if nothing in the world was out of place, as if the game hadn't already begun. I think the moment everything shifted, the moment I stopped excusing the small red flags, and finally let myself see the truth, was the morning I woke up to a text that didn't feel like it was meant for me. It was from my bank. A bland message confirming a withdrawal I never made. At first I thought it was a mistake, or maybe an auto payment I had forgotten about, but the number sat in my chest like ice. $2,700 gone in one sweep. I stared at it for a long time, convincing myself it must be a glitch. But then another text came through, this time for $1,100, and another, for $400. All within the same day. I remember whispering to myself, no, that can't be right. Even though I already knew deep down that something was unraveling behind my back, something that involved the people I trusted most. I tried to calm myself, telling my shaking hands to breathe, but fear has a way of curling around your ribs before you even realize what's happening. So I went downstairs to find my son, desperately hoping he would tell me something soothing, something rational, something that would make all this ugliness disappear. But when I asked him if he had noticed anything strange with our accounts, he didn't even pretend to care. He just leaned back in his chair, eyes fixed on the TV, and mumbled, "Mom, you always overthink stuff. Maybe you clicked something." His dismissiveness felt less like reassurance and more like a door closing in my face. I stood there waiting for him to look at me really. But he didn't, not even once, and that should have been my first clue. But I still tried to believe him, because what mother wants to imagine her own son could be involved in something so cold? Later that afternoon, I heard footsteps in the hallway, quick, hushed, almost nervous. When I turned the corner, my daughter-in-law nearly bumped into me, clutching a brand new designer handbag against her chest. Not just expensive, impossible on their budget, a bag that costs more than her monthly salary. When she saw me, she froze for half a second before forcing a smile. "New bag?" I asked lightly, pretending to admire it. She looked at it like she had forgotten she was holding it. "Othis, it was on sale." But her voice wavered just a little, just enough for my stomach to twist. Because I knew that bag. I had seen it in a store window months ago. I remembered checking the price out of curiosity. I remembered whispering, "Who spends that much on something you just hold?" That bag wasn't on sale. That bag was never on sale. She walked past me quickly, almost protectively, as if shielding the purse from my eyes. And as she disappeared into the kitchen, something inside me cracked the tiniest fracture in the foundation of trust I had built around them, a fracture that turned into something jagged and painful when I later spotted matching designer shoes in her closet, and sunglasses, and a scarf from a luxury brand even I couldn't justify spending on. But the worst part wasn't the items themselves. It was the way she started acting around me, flashing her purchases when she thought I wasn't noticing, whispering with my son when I walked into the room, suddenly insisting they needed more privacy, as if my presence was some kind of intrusion in the very home I was paying for, as if I had become the outsider. What would you do if you realized your own family was building a life that didn't include you, while using your money to do it? For weeks I tried to ignore it, swallowing suspicion after suspicion, but the feeling kept growing, like a shadow spreading across the ceiling. And then one night, when everyone was asleep, I walked past the basement door, the basement I had spent months renovating for them to live comfortably, and I saw the faintest line of light leaking from beneath it, a light that shouldn't have been there, a light that pulsed, like someone was moving around down there. I told myself it might just be a forgotten lamp, but something urged me forward, guided me like instinct, like survival. The stairs creaked under my weight, each step sinking into silence that felt too intentional. I reached the bottom and was met with something I had never seen before. The room was spotless, too spotless, as if it had been cleaned for someone else's eyes, not mine. But what pulled me was the metal cabinet in the corner, the one they never touched when I helped with the renovation. It had a locked drawer now, a drawer I had never seen them use, a drawer that didn't belong to them in the first place. Something inside me whispered, "Open it." Another voice whispered, "Walk away before you learn something you can't unlearn." But fear and curiosity have always been siblings in my life. They feed each other, so I walked toward it, slowly, carefully, listening for any movement upstairs. My fingers shook as I tugged gently on the handle. Locked. Of course, it was locked. But then I noticed something, scratches around the lock. Tiny, fresh scratches, as if someone had been opening and closing it frequently, as if it held something important enough to hide. I began searching the room for a key, not frantically, but methodically, the way my father once taught me when looking for something hidden. "People hide things where they feel safest," he said. "Look near what comforts them." So I checked the nightstand, the top of the wardrobe, the drawer with their sentimental wedding souvenirs, and there, tucked beneath a stack of old photos, was a small, silver key. My heart hammered so loudly, I feared they might hear it upstairs. I slipped the key into the lock and turned it. When the drawer slid open, my entire world shifted. Inside was a stack of documents, thick, heavy, folded with care but carrying a darkness I felt before I even touched them. The first paper I pulled out made my breath stop completely. It was a form with my name at the top, my full name, my birth date, my social security number printed in bold, but the signature at the bottom wasn't mine. I staggered backward, clutching the edge of the bed to steady myself. A part of me refused to accept what I was seeing. Another part whispered the truth I had been too afraid to say out loud. Someone had been using my identity. I flipped through more papers, each one worse than the last, loan inquiries I never submitted, payment agreements I didn't recognize, and one document that made my whole body go cold, a pre-approval form for an insurance policy, listing my death as the payout trigger. A policy in which the beneficiaries were my son and daughter-in-law. I stopped breathing. I didn't cry. I just stared. Because how do you process something like that? How do you process the fact that someone you raised, someone you held as a baby, someone whose nightmares you soothed, considered profit in the event of your death? I told myself I needed to calm down. I told myself I might be misreading. I told myself there had to be some benign explanation, but every instinct in my body screamed otherwise. And then, Buried beneath the stack of papers, I found something that confirmed everything. A travel itinerary. At first glance, it seemed harmless, just printouts of flight details. But when I looked closer, I realized the dates matched the week my son told me he was too busy to help me with paperwork. The week he said the kids were staying over with their grandmother, their other grandmother. The week they told me my grandchildren were bonding with her more now. My eyes scanned the itinerary again, and my heart broke when I saw it. My name had been erased with correction fluid, and in its place, written carefully in pen, was her name. My daughter-in-law's mother. It wasn't just a trip. It wasn't just a change in plans. It was symbolic, meaningful, intentional. They were building a life that didn't include me. A life that I was unknowingly funding. I didn't know whether to scream, collapse, or run, but what I did know was that I couldn't stay silent anymore. I went upstairs quietly, breathing through the panic swelling in my chest. And when I found my son alone in the living room, scrolling through his phone without a care in the world, something in me cracked, not loudly, but deeply, a quiet breaking, the kind you feel in your bones. I sat beside him, slowly, calmly. "Can we talk?" I whispered. He didn't look up. "About what?" I swallowed hard. "I found some papers downstairs." He finally lifted his eyes, but there was no guilt in them, no fear, just irritation. "What papers?" he said too casually. I couldn't bring myself to accuse him directly, so I chose my words carefully. "Financial documents. With my information on them, documents I didn't sign." A muscle twitched in his jaw. It was small, but it told me everything. "Why were you going through our stuff?" he snapped. "Our stuff?" I repeated, stunned. "My social security number is on those forms. My name. You don't trust us." He cut in, louder now, angrier, something dark flickering behind his eyes. I stared at him in disbelief. "Trust you? Honey, someone is using my identity. Someone is withdrawing my money. I'm scared. Then maybe you shouldn't be living with us." He shouted suddenly, slamming his hand against the armchair so hard the lamp rattled. I froze. I had never heard him raise his voice at me like that. Not once in his entire life. My throat tightened. "Why are you yelling? I just want to understand what's happening." He stood up abruptly, pointing a finger at me with a shaking hand. "Because you always make everything about you. You can't let us live our lives without accusing us of something. You're paranoid." Paranoid. The word hit me like a slap. "I found documents," I whispered. "Real documents." He paced the room like a caged animal. "You don't know what you're reading. You always assume the worst. You never trust us. You never have." His words were knives sharp, precise, meant to wound. I tried to hold on to my calm. I tried not to cry because I knew tears would make him feel more justified in dismissing me. I took a shaky breath. "I'm your mother. I just need to know what those documents mean." He stopped suddenly, turning toward me with eyes I didn't recognize anymore. And then he said something I will never forget. "You need to stop digging. Just stop. Before you ruin everything, everything." The word echoed in my chest. "What exactly?" I whispered. "Am I ruining?" He didn't answer. He just looked at me with a coldness I had never seen before and walked away. That should have been the end of the confrontation, but something in me refused to stay silent. I followed him. Down the hallway. Into his bedroom. And that's when I saw it. Something sticking out of his nightstand drawer. A corner of another document. One I hadn't found downstairs, and when I pulled the drawer open, my knees nearly buckled, because nothing prepared me for the document I found in my son's drawer. I still remember the moment I realized I couldn't stay quiet anymore. It was strange, almost peaceful, like the calm breath a person takes before jumping into cold water. The night before, I had found myself sitting alone at my kitchen table, staring at the pile of documents I'd uncovered from their locked drawer, the withdrawals, the insurance papers, the forged forms with my name printed in a handwriting that pretended to be mine. I traced my fingers over the jagged edges of each page, feeling the ache build in my chest, not because of what they had taken, but because of what they had planned to take. And when I whispered to myself, "Enough," it wasn't anger. It was survival. It was the first time in months, maybe years, that I recognized my own voice again. Little did I know that this quiet moment was the beginning of a storm that would tear my family open in ways none of us could come back from. The next morning, I walked into a law office with trembling hands, trying my best to look composed even though my heart felt like it was cracking with every step. The receptionist smiled kindly and asked if I had an appointment. I nodded. My voice wouldn't come out. I wasn't used to defending myself. I wasn't used to the idea that I even needed to. When the lawyer finally ushered me into her office, her expression softened the moment she saw the documents spilling out of my folder. I tried to explain, but my throat tightened, and she gently placed a glass of water in front of me. "Take your time," she said. "Start at the beginning." And so I did, haltingly at first. Then, with the kind of painful honesty that only comes when someone has been pushed past the point of fear. With every detail I shared, her face shifted from concern to disbelief to something like fury on my behalf. And when she finally whispered, "They've been positioning themselves to control everything you own," I felt the room tilt. It wasn't paranoia. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was real. And it was dangerous. But what she told me next left my stomach twisting. "If they've already accessed your accounts," she said, "you need to secure everything immediately, quietly, before they realize you know what they've done." I felt the blood drain from my face. These weren't strangers. These weren't scammers. This was my son. My only child. The little boy I used to tuck in at night, whose scraped knees and bedtime fears I soothed with my own hands. How does a mother even begin to protect herself against her own child? Yet something colder, more determined, settled in me as she guided me through what I needed to do. We worked for hours opening new accounts, freezing old ones, putting alerts, creating barriers where trust used to be. Every password I changed felt like a funeral. But every protection I set in place felt like armor I should have put on years ago. And in the midst of all this anguish, one truth kept echoing inside me, louder than the fear. If I didn't stand up for myself now, they would strip me of everything: memory, identity, dignity, piece by piece. When I finally left the office, the sky had darkened into that heavy color right before rain. I drove home through streets that looked familiar but felt foreign, like I had stepped into a parallel life where everything was the same, except the people I loved most had turned into strangers with my name between their teeth. As I pulled into my driveway, I saw the lights on in the basement unit. The space I had renovated for them with nothing but love and the hope that keeping family close meant keeping family safe. A bitter irony dug into me as I watched the shadows move behind their curtains. I wasn't ready to confront them yet. I still needed answers. I still needed to gather everything that would protect me when the truth finally exploded into the open. But I didn't expect that the very moment I stepped inside my home, something would happen that shifted everything again. My phone buzzed with a notification. Another cash withdrawal. A large one. And from an account they shouldn't have known existed. My hands shook so violently, I nearly dropped the phone. My lawyer had warned me. They might panic when they sense the money flow changing, but this wasn't panic. This was precision. Calculated, like they knew exactly how far they could push before I'd notice. My breath hitched, and for a moment I thought about running downstairs, right then, screaming, demanding answers. But something held me back. Not fear, not hesitation. Strategy. Confronting manipulators without evidence is like stepping into quicksand. The more you fight, the faster you sink. So instead, I took a deep breath and walked quietly toward the basement, stopping just before their door. I pressed my ear against the wall, praying to hear something that explained the withdrawal. What I heard instead made my stomach twist. My daughter-in-law's voice floated through the wall, dripping with irritation. "She's going to notice. I told you this would happen." And then my son's low voice responded, colder than I had ever heard. "It doesn't matter. We're almost done. After this, she won't have anything left to cling to." My heart stuttered. Almost done. Done what? Done taking. Done using me. Done with me. That sentence sliced deeper than anything else they'd done because it stripped away every excuse I had tried to make for them. Every delusion that maybe, just maybe, some of this could be explained. It couldn't. Not anymore. And as I stood silently in the dark hallway, fighting the urge to cry out, it dawned on me that love, real love, should never make someone feel disposable. I stepped away from their door, forcing myself to stay quiet even though the betrayal felt loud enough to shake the walls. I walked upstairs slowly, each step heavy with the weight of what I had just heard. I knew I needed more proof. Proof my lawyer could use. Proof no one could twist or manipulate. The next morning, while they were out, I went back down to their unit, telling myself I was only checking on the plumbing, but truly, I was checking on them. The air down there felt different, stale, tense, almost claustrophobic. Like the walls themselves had absorbed every secret whispered in the dark. I noticed the locked drawer again, the one I had jimmied open once before. My heart thudded as I slid it open a second time, half afraid of what else I might find. half knowing I had no choice but to keep digging. The drawer was worse this time. Far worse. I found more forms, fake signatures, fake dates, even a printed pre-approval request for putting me in an assisted living facility. They had circled words like medical decline and independent living no longer appropriate. I pressed the papers against my chest, feeling the tremble in my hands spread to my arms. They weren't just trying to take my money. They were trying to erase my independence completely. My breath turned shallow as another wave of betrayal crashed over me. Was I truly that inconvenient to them? Just a burden to be managed, paperwork to be shuffled, a human wallet with a beating heart. What would you do if you uncovered plans that made it clear your own family had been preparing to remove your freedom without your consent? And then, I found it. The document that stopped everything inside me. A printed email confirmation of an insurance policy on my life naming my son and daughter-in-law as beneficiaries. The amount was far more than I ever imagined they knew I had. I felt the room blur. My knees weakened, and for a terrifying second, I thought I might faint. I sat down on the edge of their bed, clutching the paper, trying to breathe through the rising panic. I had seen cruelty. I had heard lies, but this was something else. This was deliberate. Calculated. Cold. My hands were shaking so violently, I had to press them against my legs to stop the trembling. I whispered into the empty room, "How could you?" Not angrily, not accusingly, but broken, like a mother who finally sees the truth she never wanted to face. When I took all the documents back upstairs, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I felt something inside me harden, instead a quiet resolve I didn't know I was capable of. I made copies. I labeled everything. I organized it into binders. I became the detective of my own life, collecting proof of a betrayal I still wasn't emotionally ready to accept. And as I worked, as I pieced together their paper trail, I realized something chilling. None of this was impulsive. It was planned, layered, coordinated, time-stamped. They had built a parallel life without Mia, life where I wasn't a mother or grandmother, but an obstacle, a number, a source, a means to an end. Later that evening, I invited them upstairs for dinner. Not out of kindness, not out of nostalgia, but because it was time. I had spent too long being silent, too long hoping they would come to their senses, too long believing love could outweigh greed. They arrived a few minutes late. My daughter-in-law wearing a designer sweater I had never seen before, one I now knew I had unknowingly paid for. She smiled with that tight, patronizing curve of her lips she saved for when she wanted to appear innocent. My son looked tired, but not the kind of tired that comes from work. The kind that comes from deceit. His eyes darted toward my face, then to the table, then away again, and I knew he felt something was off. We sat down. No one touched the food. The air was thick, almost suffocating. My heart pounded in my chest, but my voice was steady when I finally said, "I need to talk to you both." My daughter-in-law immediately straightened, her fingers tapping against her wine glass. My son swallowed hard, his jaw tightening. I pulled out the first document, the bank withdrawal. I watched their faces shift, just barely, but enough for me to see recognition flash in their eyes. "I didn't authorize this," I said softly. My daughter-in-law's expression softened into a mask of pity. "Oh, you must be confused. You've been forgetting things lately." She said it with such practiced concern that for a moment I could see how easily someone outside the family might believe her. But I wasn't that gullible anymore. I slid out the next document, then the next, and the next. Each one a blow of truth. A blade cutting through whatever stories they thought they'd spin. My son's face drained of color. My daughter-in-law's pity dissolved into something harder, irritation. Maybe even fear bade, for she plastered on a nervous smile. "This is all a misunderstanding," she said, her voice wobbling. "You mix up dates. You read things wrong. You always have." She leaned forward, twisting her voice into something falsely soothing. "Why don't you let us handle this? It's too much stress for someone your age." And that was the moment something snapped inside me. Not loudly, not dramatically, but in a quiet, definitive way that felt like reclaiming my own spine. I looked her directly in the eye and said, "Then explain the insurance policy in my name." The words hung in the air like a match hovering over gasoline. My son inhaled sharply. My daughter-in-law's entire face froze. And then, in a voice that didn't sound like my son at all, he muttered, "You weren't supposed to see that." My chest tightened. My breath caught. The boy I raised, the boy who used to run into my arms after school, stood across the table from me with a look I had never seen before. A look that made every maternal instinct in me recoil. Before I could reply, my daughter-in-law exploded into accusations. "This is why we can't trust you. This is why we had to plan things ourselves. You overreact. You twist everything. You're impossible to help. Her voice rose, shrill, desperate, and suddenly, I understood. She wasn't trying to deny anything. She was trying to bury me under noise, drown me in confusion, make me question my own mind. It was gaslighting of the cruelest kind. But I didn't fall for it. Not this time. Not anymore. The shouting escalated until the children came to the stairs, their faces pale, eyes wide. Their little hands gripped the railing as they watched adults they loved transform into something terrifying. My daughter-in-law noticed them and immediately pointed at me. "See, you've upset them. You always do. Nothing is ever enough for you." The venom in her voice seemed to echo off the walls. My son stood up, pacing, running his hands through his hair like a man caught in a trap of his own making. "Why couldn't you just stay out of it?" he muttered, not to me, but to himself. But I stayed calm. Calm in a way I didn't know I was capable of, because they didn't know, none of them knew that I had already filed a report. That every document was already scanned and secured. That every account was already locked down. That I wasn't the helpless, fragile mother they thought I was. I wasn't confused. I wasn't mistaken. I wasn't losing my mind. I was protecting it. And then, in the middle of the chaos, in the midst of their shouting, and the children's trembling, and my daughter-in-law's desperate attempts to twist reality, my phone rang. Loud, sharp, cutting through the tension like a blade. I picked it up with steady hands. "Hello," I said. The voice on the other end was crisp, official. "This is the county courthouse," the woman said. "We're calling to inform you your hearing has been scheduled." I felt the room freeze around me, and when the judge called my name, the entire room froze. The morning of the hearing felt unreal. Like waking up inside a dream you've had too many times but never believed would come true. I remember standing in front of the mirror before leaving the house, smoothing the front of my blouse with hands that trembled not from fear, but from the weight of everything that had led me there. My reflection looked older than I remembered, tired, bruised by betrayal, carved with sleepless nights, but there was something else too. Something steadier. Something that hadn't existed for months. Resolve. As I picked up the binder of evidence I had spent countless nights organizing, it felt heavier than paper. It felt like truth, my truth, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel small walking out the door. I felt ready. Still, I wasn't prepared for what I'd see when I stepped into that courtroom. It was packed. Packed in a way that made my breath catch in my throat. Neighbors I'd known for 20 years. My late husband's cousin. Parents from my grandchildren's school. Even a few coworkers I recognized from the office where my son claimed he was too overwhelmed to keep up with life. Their eyes shifted between me and the front row where my son and daughter-in-law sat together, looking polished and pitiful, like two people auditioning for sympathy. I felt a hollow ache in my chest as I walked past them. My son didn't look at me. Not once. My daughter-in-law, however, raised her chin slightly, the corners of her mouth lifting in a controlled, icy smile, one that said she believed the room was hers. The story was hers. The narrative already shaped around her tears. But what happened next left me speechless. The moment the judge entered and we were asked to rise, I caught the faintest glimpse of panic in my son's eyes. It was small, almost invisible, but it was there like a child about to get caught in a lie. And when we sat down, his knee began bouncing under the table. My daughter-in-law placed a manicured hand on his leg, stopping it, then patted him gently, as if reassuring a nervous pet. Already, their performance had begun, and I had to sit there and watch it unfold, knowing exactly how rehearsed every gesture was. When their lawyer stood, he painted a picture, so beautifully crafted, it almost made me doubt myself. He spoke of my son as a devoted child caught in the painful shift of role reversal, as if he were a hero struggling under the burden of caring for an aging, declining parent. He described my daughter-in-law as a woman who stepped into the role of caregiver with compassion and grace. Someone who took on emotional, physical, and financial strain without ever expecting gratitude. I felt heat rising in my face, not from anger alone but from the deep humiliation of being spoken about as if I were not in the room, as if I were an object, as if my grief, my confusion, my pain were nothing more than props in their performance. And yet, I forced myself to stay still, stay calm, stay silent, because I knew something they didn't. When it was my son's turn to speak, he stood with shaky hands and a practiced expression of concern. "I love my mother," he began, his voice breaking just enough to look believable. "I've tried so hard to support her, but lately, she hasn't been herself." I closed my eyes briefly, feeling something inside me crack, not because his lie hurt, but because the lie sounded so effortless. "She forgets things," he continued. "She loses track of time. She gets overwhelmed. We only intervened when we realized she wasn't safe managing everything on her own anymore. He lowered his gaze, pretending to hold back emotion. We never meant to hurt her. We just wanted to help. Help. The word tasted rotten. My daughter-in-law's turn was worse. Much worse. She stood with her shoulders back and her voice soft, trembling in all the right ways. I've always admired her, she said. She gave me a home when my own family turned their back on me. I only wanted to repay that kindness. She glanced at me with eyes that glistened on cue. But she began accusing us of things we never did. She became paranoid. Confused. We tried everything to reassure her, but she pushed us away. She sniffed gently, wiping a tear that I'm certain never existed. She thinks we're the enemy, but we've only ever wanted what's best for her. Her words were blades dipped in honey. And while the room murmured with sympathy, I felt a cold wave of disbelief wash over me. Was this really how far they would go? But then my lawyer arose, and everything changed. Her tone was controlled, steady, but there was an undercurrent of fire in her voice as she began laying out the timeline dates, amounts, documents, signatures that did not match mine, transactions that occurred while I was asleep or physically away from home. The courtroom's atmosphere shifted with each piece of evidence. The sympathetic glances the crowd had been giving my son and daughter-in-law began to fade, replaced by confusion, disbelief, and something sharper. My daughter-in-law's smile wavered. My son's shoulders tensed. And when my lawyer revealed the unauthorized withdrawal patterns, their eyes darted toward each other with a flicker of panic they couldn't hide. But what happened next left the room in stunned silence. The insurance paperwork. When my lawyer placed it on the projection screen, enlarged for the entire room to see, a collective gasp filled the air. The policy amount gleamed in bold print. My name, their names, the timeline, the application, the signature that looked like mine but wasn't mine. My daughter-in-law's face drained of color. My son swallowed hard, staring at the floor like it might swallow him too. Their lawyer fumbled, stammering something about miscommunication and precautionary measures. But no one in that room believed him. Not anymore. Still, nothing prepared me for the moment the judge turned her gaze toward the witness stand and asked, would the minor child like to speak? My heart lurched. My granddaughter, my sweet, timid, gentle granddaughter looked at me with wide, frightened eyes. She hesitated, clutching the edge of her seat, and then, slowly, she stood. She walked to the stand with steps so small and quiet the entire room leaned forward to hear her. When she sat down, her legs barely reached the edge of the seat. The judge lowered her voice, speaking gently. You can tell the truth, she said. You're safe here. My granddaughter nodded, her chin trembling. And then, in the softest voice I'd ever heard, she said something that shattered the entire courtroom. Mommy told me what to say, she whispered. The room stilled. You could hear nothing, not a breath, not a shift of clothing, not even the hum of the overhead lights. My daughter-in-law jerked upright, her mouth opening, but the judge raised a stern hand to silence her. My granddaughter continued, tears beginning to slip down her cheeks. She made me practice. She said Grandma was confused and that if I didn't say it right, we'd get in trouble. My chest tightened painfully. My son buried his face in his hands. But she wasn't done. She told me to say Grandma forgets things. My granddaughter sobbed. But she doesn't. She just cries a lot when she thinks nobody's watching. I felt my heart tear in two. My granddaughter, my little angel, had been carrying that weight all along. She wiped her face with her sleeve. I didn't want to lie, she whispered. I didn't want to hurt Grandma. Everything inside me broke. Everything. And something inside my daughter-in-law broke too, but not in the same way. Her mask, the perfect composure she'd crafted so carefully, cracked open in a single moment of fury. She shot up from her seat, her voice twisting into something sharp and venomous. You didn't say it right. I told you what to say. The courtroom erupted in chaos as gasps filled the room. Her lawyer grabbed her arm, trying to pull her back down. My son stared at her like he was seeing her for the first time, but it was too late. The mask wasn't slipping, it had fallen off completely. The judge slammed her gavel, demanding silence. The order in her voice was absolute. She turned her glare toward my son and daughter-in-law with a cold fury that made even me sit straighter. And then she spoke, clear and unwavering. This court finds substantial evidence of manipulation, financial exploitation, and coercive control. My daughter-in-law's face crumpled into disbelief. My son looked like his bones had turned to sand. The judge continued, her voice slicing through the room with undeniable authority. Effective immediately, neither of you will have access to the petitioner's accounts, property, or financial information. Mandatory counseling is ordered. Any further attempt to interfere with her autonomy will be grounds for criminal charges. The room fell silent, utterly silent. My hands rested in my lap, trembling with shock, relief, heartbreak all tangled together in a way I couldn't separate. My son stared at the table, unable to meet my gaze. My daughter-in-law crossed her arms like a child, denied a toy. My granddaughter looked at me with eyes full of apology I never asked her to carry. And slowly, I felt something lift off my chest. A pressure I had carried for so long, I forgot what it felt like to breathe without it. And in that silence, I realized I was finally free. I never thought healing could feel this quiet. For so long, I believed the end of my story would be loud, triumphant, dramatic. Some kind of cinematic victory where the people who hurt me apologized in front of the world. But when the dust finally settled after the courtroom, what I felt wasn't triumph. It was stillness. A kind of silence that wasn't empty, but spacious. Like someone had finally opened a window in a room I'd been suffocating in for years. And in that space, something inside me whispered, "You can breathe now." But even then, I wasn't sure how. The first morning after the ruling, I woke up before the sun. No messages from my daughter-in-law demanding explanations. No calls from my son telling me what I needed to do. No footsteps outside my door. Just me, in my house, with my own heartbeat echoing louder than any fear. I didn't know what to do with that kind of freedom. For a moment, I even felt guilty for having it. But then I stepped outside, let the cold air hit my skin, and something in me shifted. It wasn't joy. It wasn't relief. It was deeper, something like recognition. Like remembering a version of myself I thought had died quietly a long time ago. But healing never comes in a straight line. Some mornings, I made tea, sat at the table, and just stared at the chair where my son once sat as a little boy, swinging his legs, asking me if superheroes ever got scared. And I wondered, how did we get so far away from that simple innocence? How did love turn into obligation? How did obligation turn into control? And how did control turn into something that almost destroyed me? On those mornings, the silence didn't feel freeing. It felt like a bruise I kept pressing just to see if it still hurt. Still, I knew I had to move forward. Not in grand, showy ways, but in gentle steps. The kind you take when your legs are shaky but your spirit is stubborn. I signed up for a community class. Nothing extraordinary, just a pottery course at the local center. I walked inside feeling ridiculous, like everyone could smell the fear still clinging to me. But then the instructor showed me how to center the clay on the wheel, how to push down gently, how to let the shape rise under my palms. And for the first time in years, my hands were creating something, instead of clinging to the edges of survival. At the end of the first session, I looked at the uneven, lopsided bowl I had made and felt something break open inside me. Not sadness, not pride, something in between, maybe hope. Week by week, my life began to feel less like a war zone and more like something I could return to. I took myself out to breakfast on Sundays alone, without rushing, without apologizing for existing. I bought flowers for my own table. I walked through a bookstore and realized I could buy whatever I wanted without someone checking my statements. And one afternoon, sitting by my bedroom window, I asked myself a question I hadn't allowed in years. What do you want now that you're no longer fighting to survive? It terrified me how difficult it was to answer. But what happened next surprised me even more. My son called, not with arrogance, not with excuses, just a quiet, hesitant voice, saying, "Mom, can we talk sometime?" And that question alone felt like standing on a fault line. One wrong move, and everything could crack apart again. I didn't say yes. I didn't say no. I said, "Not yet." And for the first time in years, he didn't argue. He just said he understood. But the truth is, I didn't know what I felt. Anger still simmered under my ribs, but so did love. How do you separate the two when they come from the same place? And what would you do if your own child tried to break you without even realizing the pieces they shattered belonged to someone who once carried them? I asked myself that question every night before bed. Some nights I forgave him. Some nights I didn't. Healing isn't a moment, it's a cycle. His wife, however, kept her distance. No messages, no apologies, not even an attempt to pretend. And honestly, that silence was its own kind of peace. I didn't want to hear her voice twisting words, bending reality, turning my exhaustion into her performance. She had already taken too much space in my life. I wasn't going to let her take any more, not even in the form of guilt. But the grandchildren, oh, the grandchildren were different. The first time they came back to my house, they ran through the door without looking for permission. Their little shoes hit the floor. Their laughter bounced off the walls. And something inside me, something wounded, fragile, just collapsed. My oldest granddaughter threw her arms around me so tightly that her breath trembled against my shoulder. "Grandma, we missed you so much," she whispered, and those words carried more truth than any court testimony. I held her, held all of them, and for a moment, the years of manipulation, the rehearsed lines they had been forced to memorize, the fear that had tainted their innocence, it all felt smaller than this single moment of honest affection. But even joy carries shadows. Because after they ran into the kitchen, the youngest looked up at me and asked, "Are we allowed to be here now?" And that question broke my heart in a way nothing else had. Imagine being so small that love feels like something you have to ask permission for. I pulled him close and whispered, "You never have to ask permission to love me." And as he leaned into me, I silently promised myself that no one, not their parents, not fear, not manipulation, would ever weaponize them again. I set boundaries the way someone sets stones to mark a path. Slowly, intentionally, without apology. If my son wanted to visit, he needed to call beforehand. No drop-ins, no demands, no attempts to rewrite history. And if he wanted a real relationship, it had to come with honesty, not performance. At first, he agreed almost too quickly, and I mistrusted it. But over time, his actions softened around the edges. He spoke slowly, admitted things I never thought he'd say, acknowledged the harm without minimizing it. It wasn't perfect. It didn't erase anything. But for the first time in a long time, it felt real. The woman he married, however, stayed in the shadows of her own silence. Maybe out of shame, maybe out of anger, maybe because losing control was the first consequence she'd ever faced. I didn't need to analyze it. Sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is accept that closure doesn't always come from the people who hurt you. Sometimes closure is choosing not to open the door again. As months passed, my life began to expand in directions I never expected. I found myself forming friendships with people I met in class. Neighbors who had watched me struggle quietly but were now seeing a different version of me. They invited me to lunches, to small gatherings, to conversations that didn't revolve around crisis or survival. For years, I had believed that family meant blood, duty, and endurance. But these new friends showed me another kind of family, the kind built on choice, kindness, and mutual respect. And that kind of love felt softer, steadier, and oddly safer than what I had been clinging to before. One afternoon, as I sat with one of those new friends in her backyard, watching the light shift through the leaves, she said something that stayed with me. "You didn't get your life back. You started a new one." At first, I wanted to argue. But then I realized she was right. The woman who sat in that courtroom trembling was not the same woman who now planted flowers, shaped clay, hosted dinners, and learned to trust laughter again. I didn't get anything back. I built something new from the ruins. Still, there were moments, quiet moments, when memories returned like ghosts. The nights I cried alone in my car. The mornings my bank notifications terrified me. The arguments that left me shaking. The humiliation of being treated like someone who was losing herself when in truth, they were trying to take pieces of me little by little. But every time those memories rose, so did something else. A deeper understanding that surviving isn't the same as living. And I was finally learning the difference. One evening, sitting by the window with a warm light behind me, I looked around my house and realized something strange. It didn't feel haunted anymore. For the first time, it felt like home, not a battleground, not a prison, not a place where I walked on eggshells because someone else wanted control. Just a home, my home. And then came the moment I knew I had fully returned to myself. I booked a solo trip, just a small train ride to a little coastal town I'd always wanted to visit. No schedule, no expectations, no one to update or report to. When I stood on that shoreline, feeling the wind whip across my face, watching the waves roll in with their endless rhythm, I felt something settle inside me. Not peace, exactly, something deeper. Something like identity. I whispered into the wind, "I'm still here." And saying it out loud made it real in a way nothing else had. In the end, I shared my story, not for revenge, not for validation, but for liberation. Because there are so many mothers who endure what I endured, so many women who believe that love requires them to shrink, to surrender, to silence themselves. But I learned something crucial. Love without boundaries becomes sacrifice. And sacrifice without respect becomes destruction. And no mother, no woman, no human being deserves to be destroyed in the name of loyalty. So if you're listening to this and wondering whether it's wrong to choose yourself, let me tell you what I wish someone had told me years ago. Sometimes, you don't save the family. Sometimes, you save yourself. And there is nothing selfish about surviving. There is nothing wrong with choosing peace over chaos, dignity over manipulation, truth over illusion. The last time my son visited, he hugged me gently, hesitantly, as though afraid he might break something fragile. And maybe he was right. Something inside me is fragile, but not in the way it used to be. Fragile like fine glass, transparent, strong, and shaped with intention. Fragile, but never again breakable by the hands that once tried to reduce me. After he left, I sat at the table alone, looked at the sunlight on the floor, and felt a profound certainty wash over me. I had done it. I had reclaimed my life, not with vengeance, not with bitterness, but with truth. And that truth became my anchor, my compass, my rebirth. And that's when I learned the truth. Freedom is the greatest inheritance.